It's March 30th, 1981. And no, kids, I was not born yet. Stop calling me old. But I was a Reagan baby. Then President Ronald Reagan was attending a meeting. He was walking outside of the Washington Hilton Hotel with his Secret Service agents and his press secretary. They were talking to reporters and acting like nothing was wrong when all of a sudden, 6 very loud shots ring out. Press Secretary James Brady was struck in the head, a DC policeman was shot, as well as a Secret Service agent. After the would-be assassin was tackled and held down, that's when everyone noticed that Reagan was bleeding from his chest. So many accounts of this story say that Reagan did not realize that he had been hit. That's actually a phenomenon you see a lot with shootings. Shock kicks in. Other Secret Service agents managed to grab him and pull him into a limo to get him to a hospital. But the story just gets weirder from here. Let's talk Reagan on History Talk. We'll get to the bizarre motive behind this shooting shortly, but let's talk about the immediate aftermath. Reagan was rushed to George Washington University Hospital. He had been shot in the lung, which is one of the worst places you can get shot. Like, there's not really a good place to get shot, but that's one of the worst. Despite this, the man walks into the hospital. When his wife showed up, he very famously said, "I forgot to duck." Dark humor, sir. There is a man that has been shot in the head that was with you. Settle down. He immediately went into surgery and looked at the doctors and anesthesiologists who were getting ready to put him under, at which point he said, "Please tell me you're Republicans." The surgery was successful, took a few hours, and Reagan had to stay on the mend for a bit. Unfortunately for his press secretary, who will play a very important part in American gun legislation later, was not doing so well. He was shot in the eye, suffered permanent brain damage. So who's John Hinckley Jr.? And what did he have against Reagan? Well, the answer is he actually really didn't have anything against Reagan. And sometimes I've been asked if this story is true, and it's absolutely 1000% true. The man was obsessed with an actress. And you may know who she is. Jodie Foster. The Jodie Foster element of this story is not exaggerated at all. He was in love with her. Hinckley spent a lot of time trying to plot ways to get her attention. He was a little out there with the solutions. You know, some guys just send flowers. He wanted to, hijack an airplane and crash it. Rein it back yeah. She first came to his attention in the movie Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro, starring as a man who wanted to assassinate a president. She played a trafficking victim. So Hinckley decides, well, if that works for Robert De Niro, at first he was going to track down Jimmy Carter, but he would follow him from state to state. Eventually, he decided on Reagan. Once Hinckley decided on the target, he wrote Jodie Foster a love letter. Now, it wasn't the first letter or poem he'd ever sent her. He'd been, in constant communication. He also claims they spoke on the telephone, something Jodie denied. But then it came out that this man had been recording the phone conversations. Now, I don't think this is anything like consensual. I think this was a woman who was dealing with a weird stalker and was like, okay, well, she is absolutely blameless here. Don't forget that. This man was tracking her down to her dorm room. I have no doubt this is just a stalking situation. So she may have spoken to him, but I doubt there was any encouragement. In fact, many detectives say she was irritated and terrified of this man. And if there's a man you're afraid of and you're a woman, sometimes there are these men that you just have to be nice to so they won't kill you. But I don't think she thought it was going to escalate to the level that it did. I mean, the creep opened the phone call up with, "Hi, I'm the man who's been leaving letters in your box for 2 years." If you live outside of the US, there's one thing you need to know. Our government agencies do not communicate with one another. That's not an exaggeration. That's literally why 9/11 happened. Because CIA, FBI, both sitting on information that could have solved it before it happened. But they hated each other. And Hinckley was delusional. He was suffering from something that psychologists call erotomania, which is basically just the obsession of being in love with someone and convincing yourself that they are in love with you too. With Foster not wanting anything to do with him, missing the opportunity to take care of Carter, he decides to pick Reagan. And much like Oswald finding Kennedy's motorcade route in a newspaper, Hinckley found out where Reagan was from a paper. He had no intention of unlifing Reagan that day, but it just seemed to be, well, there we go, that's a sign. He stood amongst the reporters as they all walked out. The Secret Service will normally screen who is allowed to be at a certain place, but there was one group of people who had not been screened, and then he fires. scene that unfolded was chaos. Hinckley managed to take out a Secret Service agent first. He was not seriously injured, but he was shot in the neck. And unfortunately, that gave Hinckley a clear, direct shot at Reagan. Reagan's injuries were very serious, even though he was joking up until surgery. Truest tragedy in this story, though, is that of Jim Brady. Brady suffered permanent neurological damage and was blind in one eye for the rest of his life. He had slurred speech for the rest of his life and used a wheelchair most of the time. His name should be familiar for you, especially if you're a 90s kid. Remember the Brady bill? The gun control bill? Named for him. Brady died in 2014, and because of the shooting, his death was ruled a homicide. So what happened afterward? He did eventually recover, pretty quickly for a guy who got shot in the lung. He left the hospital on April 11th. He held on to his trademark humor. At another speech, when a balloon popped sounding like gunfire, instead of jumping or acting scared, Reagan did this.
Mark the history of this city. America missed me.
Still a better talk show host than Leno. At least that was funny. Hinckley went on trial, and poor Jodie Foster, who by the way is only like 19 or 20 at this time, has to testify against him. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He stayed a long time in a mental hospital and was eventually released. He now lives in Williamsburg, Virginia, where he actually took up painting and recently held an art show to sell paintings. And you know what? I kind of want one. Not gonna lie.